Well, thank you very much. Welcome, everybody. So today I'm going to talk about early stereoscopy in Scotland. I collect Scottish stereo views, being Scottish, and I probably have about at least 5,000 these days, of which about a third are by George Washington Wilson. And I've called Scotland the cradle of stereoscopy because we all know that Sir Charles Wheatstone was the inventor of stereoscopy even prior to the advent of photography. But it's really due to and I can't get my things to move on. All right, here we go. But it's really due to the energy and enthusiasm of this man, Sir David Brewster, that we owe the commercialization of stereoscopy, because in the 1840s, the stereoscope remained something of a scientific curiosity. And Brewster started playing with the stereoscope in 1848. He was the nucleus of a group of early photographic enthusiasts in St Andrews. He was the principal of St Andrews University. And he introduced his designs for a stereoscope to his friends at the St Andrews Philosophical Society in December 1848. And this is an image of him taken by Eastlake in 1858 with one of his Brewster stereoscopes on the table beside him. Now, Brewster had earlier invented the kaleidoscope, which was a huge commercial success, but he recognized that the stereoscope had far greater potential and was a far more useful instrument than the kaleidoscope. And so he started trying to interest manufacturers in making his stereoscope. And in order to do that, he used a photograph of Dr. Adamson, who was the local St Andrews doctor and a fine early calotype photographer. And he used this to demonstrate his stereoscope to potential manufacturers. This photograph is courtesy of St Andrews University Special Collections. They've got two copies of it in albums, and they have the title, The First Stereo Portrait. It was probable that the photographer of Dr. Adamson was his assistant, Thomas Roger, who opened the first photographic studio in St Andrews in 1849. And the photograph probably dates from 1849. Rogers was quite famous for his studio portraits, but his stereo views are actually quite rare. And this is one of St Andrews, North Street, which actually looks very similar today. So here's a selection of early Brewster stereoscopes. The one closest to us is the earliest. And Brewster eventually persuaded a French manufacturer, Dubosq and Soleil, to make his designs of stereoscope. So the sort of early history of stereoscopy now moves from Scotland to Paris. And Dubosq and Soleil exhibited the Brewster stereoscope as part of their display, medal-winning display in the Great Exhibition of 1851, and stereoscopy took off. And by 1856, Brewster could claim that 500,000 of his stereoscopes had been sold, which is an absolutely enormous number. One of the problems was getting content for them, and Dubosq used some early daguerreotypes, stereo daguerreotypes, and made lithographs out of them. And this is a lithograph of a daguerreotype statue. And he also made lithographs of geometric figures. And this is my favorite in my collection. It's actually a lithograph of a drawing of a Brewster stereoscope. but it's so incredibly crude that I doubt very much if it's Dubosq that made this. So Dubosq, round about 1852, employed Claude-Marie Ferrier to take pictures of Paris. And Ferrier eventually joined forces with Charles Soulier in 1859, and they became famous for their wonderful glass stereo views, which in my opinion are some of the best stereos ever taken. And this is an example of a Ferrier and Soulier glass view, and it's a panorama of Edinburgh. This is another Ferrier and Soulier view. This is the Holyrood Abbey, which is with its connections to Mary Queen of Scots. And these early glass stereo views of Scotland were actually taken by Charles Soulier in about 1859. But heading back to Scotland, this is my earliest Scottish stereo view. It's a daguerreotype from 1853, I estimate. And the central figure standing here is George Washington Wilson. And this image was probably taken by John Hay, who was in a partnership with Wilson from 1853 to early 1855. And if we zoom in on the table, we can see an early Brewster stereoscope, and also one of these Dubosq lithographs I was talking about. And Denis Pellerin identifies this as the Laocoon statue. And in fact, this is an Underwood view of the same statue, which is currently in the Vatican. It's a classical sculpture. Now, Wilson and Hay exhibited stereoscopic images at the Aberdeen Mechanics Institute in December 1853. And this is the very first time that stereo views were included in a photographic exhibition in the UK. So Scottish stereo photographers were really very early in their adoption of stereoscopy. And you can see that Wilson and Hay won a silver and a bronze medal at that exhibition. And this is the image that sticker comes from. It's an ambrotype stereo view by Wilson and Hay of the Aberdeen artist John Cassie. And it's, I think, a very successful and beautiful image. We would date this to 1854. But the Wilson and Hay partnership was very short-lived. It ended in January 1855, and Wilson headed out by himself as a solo photographer. And he started taking photographs, stereo views of the local Aberdeen area and its surroundings. And his training as an artist is quite evident in the sort of this image here, where he's captured the stately pine forests round about Braemar. And so this was part of a very early series of views. He published a catalogue in 1856, which had about 44 local views around the Aberdeen area. And this is one of them, Ballochbowie Forest. Wilson then started to build up a huge catalogue of images. By 1890, the catalogue numbered over 2,700. And he travelled all over the British Isles, but mainly Scotland. And this is one of his images of Fingal's Cave on the island of Staffa, famous for the Mendelssohn's Hebridean Overture, inspired by this cave, and which was quite a popular tourist attraction, still is. And this is a beautiful glass tinted stereo view taken by Wilson of a bridge near Braemar. And his glass stereo views are quite a lot rarer than his paper stereo views, but some of them are very beautiful indeed. And this is one of my favorite Wilson images. It's a shot taken straight up a fir tree, And I find it's incredibly modern in its camera angle and its abstraction. And it's just a pure celebration of three-dimensionality. I love it. Wilson was famous for his instantaneous photographs. And this is his first instantaneous street view, taken along Princes Street in Edinburgh in the summer of 1859. Now, in 1859, cameras didn't have mechanical shutters, and also exposure times were very long. So typically, a photographer would remove the lens cap from their camera, count out the exposure time, and put the lens caps back on again. And the exposure time would be tens of seconds or even minutes. Now, what Wilson did here is he put his hat over the front of the lenses, and to take the photograph, he just quickly flicked his hat off with a flick of a wrist, and he's managed to get an exposure time of less than a second using that technique. And he's also managed to push the chemistry to get these very, very short for the age exposure times. And when this was shown to the press, and the press were, the photographic press were ecstatic about the fact that for almost the first time ever, you could actually see life in the streets, because before that it was the sort of cities of the dead with blurry ghosts and shadows in them. So this really was a major step forward in photography. But Wilson wasn't satisfied with it, and he went back, and this is only a year later, took this image, which is much better. The pupil's motion is stopped. You can see that the lenses are less distorted. And so he's obviously now got a mechanical shutter, and he's got improved lenses. So he was really pushing not only the frontiers of the chemistry of the technique, but also pushing camera manufacturers into developing better cameras. Another area that he was famous for was taking shots directly into the sun. And this was just unheard of back in these days. You had to have the sun behind you to take an image. And in order to achieve this, Wilson actually lined the inside of his camera with black velvet to stop the reflections inside the camera. And these images of his family boating at the Loch of Park near Aberdeen also caused a sensation when they were showed for the first time. So Wilson really was a very innovative photographer, and renowned not only for the artistic beauty of his photographs, but also for the technical innovation that he brought to the show. But he was far from the only stereophotographer in Scotland. In fact, I've identified almost 200 other stereophotographers in Scotland. His main rival was James Valentine, who also had a huge company, a photographic company based in Dundee, which was far more long-lived, in fact, than Wilson's company. And Valentine traveled throughout Scotland taking the typical tourist images, but he also differentiated himself by taking these genre views of everyday life in the Highlands. And this one's called a Highland washing. And this one is called At the Peats. And in Scotland, in certain areas, they still dig up peat and dry it and use it as a fuel. And these sort of genre images really follow in a long tradition of Scottish genre painting, and also could be said to be inspired by the poetry of Robert Burns, who celebrated the dignity of the common man. In Edinburgh, one of the principal photographers was John Muffet, and Muffet took stereo portraits of all the famous Edinburgh worthies and any visiting dignitaries. And this is just a local preacher that he's taken here. And Muffet also took photographs of mainly around Edinburgh, the local area, And this is a picture of Roslin Chapel, which I think's got quite nice depth to it. And this is the most remarkable photo that I have from Muffet. It's another instantaneous street scene, but this is actually a year earlier than Wilson's view of Princes Street. And this is a procession in the Royal Mile taken in May 1858. Now, Scotland's such a small place that I'm sure that Wilson saw this view, and I'm sure that it has given him the impetus and the inspiration to start taking instantaneous photographs. The difference is that Muffet didn't build on this early image, and there are very few other images of the streets in his repertoire, whereas Wilson worked on instantaneous photography and perfected it. Another Edinburgh photographer was Alexander McGlashan. He actually went to Australia in 1854 and became one of the very earliest stereophotographers in Australia. But he came back to Edinburgh in 1856 and built up a portfolio of very interesting views of the Edinburgh area. Slightly later in the 1860s, Archibald Burns became the principal or the most prominent stereophotographer in Edinburgh. And his street views are really quite remarkable. And this is a view of the Cowgate. And when I was at university in Edinburgh, and the Cowgate still looked pretty much like this, actually, a place to be avoided. This is another Burns view of George Street in Edinburgh. And if you've ever wandered through Edinburgh and tripped over a big concrete block on the pavement or the sidewalk, as I have, and wondered what on earth is this stupid granite block, sorry, it's granite, not concrete, doing on the middle of the pavement, now you know, because it was a step to get in and out of horse-drawn carriages. And they're still there in the streets today. Elsewhere in Scotland, there were many photographers that recorded their local areas. And up in Stirling, this is Stirling Castle, which is a very similar castle to Edinburgh in many respects, sitting on top of a volcanic plug. And in Stirling, we had Crowe, who recorded the local area. And later, he was joined by William Rogers to form the firm Crowe and Rogers. And William Rogers was the son of William Rogers, who was a Montrose photographer who took some lovely images, early images of the east coast of Scotland. And this is the Abbey of Arbroath, where the Scottish Act of Independence, Declaration of Independence, was signed in 1320. You can take our lives, but you'll never take our freedom, or words to that effect. In the Highlands, Peter Ewing of Dunkeld had a very lyrical eye and took some beautiful pictorial images of the Highlands. This is Loch Katrine and the steamer, the tourist steamer, the Sir Walter Scott. Very nicely composed image.
Peter,
Yes.
Could you move the cursor out of the right picture, because this is visible during screen sharing?
All right. Okay. Sorry. Is it down there now? Is that okay?
Yes.
So this is Brown of Falkirk took this wonderful image of curling on a frozen loch in Scotland. And curling, of course, is one of these Scottish inventions. And today, this is just a scene that wouldn't be repeated because of global warming. The lochs just don't freeze over solid enough to play curling on them anymore. And I like this image. This is by Campbell of Ayr. And it's one of these images that reminds you of the maxim, never to work with children or animals. it's the children of a local landowner in Ayr with their pet deer who has moved and it looks completely headless. Campbell of Ayr, unfortunately, in 1866, there was a recession in the UK, and tragically, Campbell committed suicide by drinking the cyanide solution that's used as a fixer for photography back in these days. Another wonderful image from Ayrshire. This is from Bannatyne of Cumnock, and it's the glass house at Auchinleck House. And it's an image that you could reach in and pick the grapes on the vines. Fantastic. One of my favorite series of Scottish views is the views of the land of Burns. And the mise en scène of the photograph is quite special. Back in the this is actually Burns Cottage, the birthplace of Robert Burns. And back in 1860, this was actually a tavern. The views of the life of Burns were first advertised in January 1859 to celebrate Burns' centenary, the centenary of Burns' birth. And recently, I've been able to identify the photographer of him as a James Brewster. He is not related to the David Brewster. So we started with a Brewster, and so I'm going to finish with a Brewster as well. And that was a rather whistle-stop tour of stereoscopy in Scotland. I have written a book on it, Scotland in 3D, a Victorian virtual reality tour, which has got about 220 full-size side-by-side images in it. And there's also a lot of information on my website, www.scotland3d.com, and that's just Scotland with a 3 inserted before the final D. So that's that. I'd be very happy to take any questions if that's appropriate at this point.